The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to welcome two members of the Fairfax County delegation, Delegate Rob Krupicka. Good to see you, sir.
Thanks, Woody.
And Vivian Watts. Good to see you again.
Great to see you, Woody.
Why don't you tell us what's going on in your district, especially in terms of the economy and the continuing problems with sequestration or across-the-board budget cuts at the federal level?
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, we represent all of Northern Virginia, even though it's cut up into a number of different districts. My particular district happens to be an extraordinarily diverse district. It straddles both 95, 395, as well as the Beltway, all of the mixing bowl around Springfield. So that what I'm looking at are both ends of the spectrums. I'm looking at the problems with the local economy as well as the state's economy of sequestration. In all of my many years of service, I have never known Virginia's economy to be lagging behind the national economic indicators in employment and in revenue growth. But we are, and that is much of that is to do with the fact of sequestration. You're not seeing any investment in businesses, as well as a lot of equity sitting on the side. So we are finding that our rental rates throughout Fairfax County, and I'm sure throughout Northern Virginia, for commercial and office properties is way down. It's about the lowest, again, that I have ever seen, as far as, I should say, the highest vacancy factor that I have ever seen. So all of this has spin-off. And so when we look at the spin-off of this at the high end of the income stream that should be our economic engine, it is definitely affecting the citizens that I represent, the great diversity that I represent. Half the average of my elementary schools, 50% of the children are entitled to free and reduced lunch. And that's an income level that's set nationally, so you know that it's extremely low in the area that I represent. There's great needs, and our economy is causing real problems.
So we have yet to come out of the Great Recession, at least in terms of where things stand now.
No, I think that's exactly right. I know when I go speak to my local governments in Arlington, Alexandria, and Fairfax, you know, one of their biggest concerns is the state sending more mandates to them that they can't pay for, or asking them to pick up more of the tab in education or transportation or whatever it may be, when they're really struggling to make their budgets meet every year. You know, we're in kind of year 7 or 8 of constraint as a state. It's a long period of time where teachers haven't been getting raises, employees of local government as well as state government haven't been getting raises, services have been constricted and reduced and eliminated in some cases, and we've been doing this for a very long time, and it's really starting to show. You know, you see it in the quality of services that are available and in the tenor of government and its ability to be responsive to the needs of the community. You know, I think the governor has properly set the stage for this by going around and really emphasizing the need for us to create a new Virginia economy. And that's, I think, what a lot of the focus here in the General Assembly is. How do we build a state that isn't so overly reliant on federal revenues? How do we attract new businesses to the state that can offset those losses of federal spending? How do we build an economy that can, again, lead the country in growth as opposed to lag as we are right now?
So talk to us about the makeup of your district, both geographically and demographically.
Sure. So I have a very diverse district. I cover southern Arlington, the eastern side of Alexandria, as well as a little bit of Fairfax and the Mount Vernon district. We have everything from people who are enormously successful to folks who are really struggling every day and have multiple jobs and trying to keep their family together. You know, the schools in my district have a high proportion of students on free and reduced price lunch. It's a wonderful district. It's a close-knit community. It's diverse. Everyone kind of works together and supports each other, but folks are struggling. You know, I think the biggest challenge we've had in Northern Virginia is because of the federal cuts, you know, income growth has really slowed, and that slowing of income growth means folks are not able to, you know, invest in their community the way they used to be able to, invest in their kids the way they used to be able to, and that has a ripple effect throughout kind of the whole community, from people who have the highest incomes to those with the lowest.
So to what extent has your service previously on the City Council in Alexandria and also on the State Board of Education assisted you here?
So I certainly, I think my local government experience gives me at least a little bit of a soft spot when I hear about the concerns of local government in terms of unfunded mandates from the state and kind of additional expectations for local government to cover costs that the state used to cover. And I think one of the most glaring examples of that is in the area of education right now. The state has essentially been scaling back its commitment to education over the last 7 or 8 years. We're spending less now per pupil than we were in 2007, 2009.
Yeah, I've seen some figures on that. I can't remember.
It's about 16–17% less than we were in 2009. And that per pupil reduction is having a real impact on our schools around the Commonwealth, and especially in Northern Virginia. I know when we went to the Fairfax Board of Supervisors preparing to come to legislature this year, one of their #1 issues was, don't send us any more unfunded mandates, and two, help us fund our schools.
Sure.
Help us fund our schools. School population is growing dramatically in Northern Virginia, but that reduced per pupil amount means the localities have to chip in more money. They got to raise property taxes. They got to cut other services, and that's really starting to have an effect. And I think we can't keep asking our local governments to raise property taxes to pay for education when the state has a role to play. That's why one of my biggest pieces of legislation is focused on bringing in nearly $500 million of new money for K-12 education.
Talk to us about that. I know there are 2 pieces of legislation.
Yeah, 2 that I wanted to talk about that relate to funding for schools. So the first bill that brings in $500 million would raise Virginia's cigarette tax to the average on the East Coast. And really the genesis of this bill was trying to solve a public safety issue, which is cigarette trafficking is a $7 billion industry in America. It funds gangs and organized crime, and some have even linked some of the money from cigarette trafficking to terrorist activities. People come into Virginia, buy our incredibly cheap cigarettes. We have the 2nd lowest cigarette tax in the country, so they buy boatloads of cigarettes here, and they go to other states with higher taxes and they sell them, and they use that profit to fund illegal activity. So looking at that problem that we've tried to solve through kind of bureaucratic ways, it just struck me that the obvious solution to this problem is simply to make sure our tax rate is consistent with the rest of the East Coast. That would eliminate the incredible fiscal opportunity. When you do that, you raise a considerable amount of money, about $500 million, which then, in my proposal, would allow us to take care of another big hole we have, which is this education funding challenge, where we've dropped our pupil spending and we're not helping our local governments as much as we should in pre-K through 12th grade funding. So I think it's a pretty common sense bill. You know, you take care of crime, you get more money into our schools. You're not, I think, dramatically affecting the economy, because cigarette taxes are not kind of a big, you know, driver of economic activity in the Commonwealth, and bringing it in line with the East Coast, I don't think is a very radical idea. I know our schools need the help.
And of course, we've already heard students in our institutions of higher learning starting to complain about tuition increases.
Yeah, so the way we've been balancing our budget for a number of years, or at least one of the techniques we've been using, is essentially asking colleges to raise tuition. The challenge with that is as tuition gets higher, student loan debt gets worse. And when you make students carry more debt, you really have 2 things happening. One, you discourage a bunch of students from going on to higher education because they just can't afford it, they can't take on the debt. The second thing you do is when those students graduate, instead of being able to put money into new businesses or into cars or into houses, they have to spend their money paying down their student debt. So what you're essentially doing is slowing down all of that economic activity that happens when someone graduates from college and starts enjoying the fruits of their labor and their education. Instead of being able to invest that money in their community, they have to spend all that money paying off this incredible amount of debt that they're now carrying. We're essentially taxing the future is what we're doing.
Right.
And to address that issue, given the fiscal constraint in our Commonwealth and recognizing we can't just raise taxes all the time, what I've proposed is we take a hard look at all the tax preferences we have as a Commonwealth and determine if they're working effectively. And one of the biggest tax preferences we have is for coal. We give corporate coal tax subsidies to the tune of about $100 million. Big money. The problem with that is if you look at the counties in the state that have coal, the amount of coal we have in Virginia is diminishing dramatically. We're getting close to the end of kind of the life of that industry. Coal jobs are already declining every year. The area of the state with the biggest poverty is actually coal country. And correspondingly, the area of the state that has the least number of citizens with higher educations is coal country. So I put those together and I said, the way you fix coal country's economy is you attract employers there who aren't coal companies, who can start setting up new ventures and new enterprises. But they need employees there that they can hire. To get the employees they need those employees to have higher degrees beyond high school. So if we take that coal tax credit and we transition that money instead to help fund college education or higher education for students, predominantly from coal country, but also throughout the Commonwealth, I think we're going to help the economy of coal country transition to a modern economy with new employers and new jobs that don't rely on this dying resource. And for families around the Commonwealth, it also frees up some additional money to help families afford higher education, which is a real kitchen table issue for folks. It's hard to pay for higher ed.
So it's a win-win on that regard, and the cigarette tax gets away with that arbitrage situation.
It gets rid of the arbitrage, and it also reduces the teenagers starting to smoke, which has a health benefit as well. We don't have the ability to raise taxes to solve every problem in the Commonwealth, so we have to look at how we're using the resources we have.
Right.
And I don't think anyone can objectively look at the coal tax break and say it's been working. Southwest Virginia is struggling. It's actually doing worse every year. It's not doing better. I would argue that community needs more students with higher degrees. That's how we're going to actually turn around Southwest Virginia.
So Vivian, I want to take advantage of your expertise in transportation. You've been an advocate for a long time here, and of course you were Secretary of Transportation at one time. Talk to us about what's going on. We are implementing the transportation package that was passed a couple of sessions ago now.
And yes, it was, excuse me, in 2013. And there was a great expectation about the flow of money. It had been 30 years, for all intents and purposes, since we had replenished the investment in the transportation infrastructure. So you had at least 15 years of incredible backlog of needs. We should have acted at least 15 years earlier. So as the new flow of money began, two things happened. One, it wasn't all that was anticipated. It was anticipated that the price of gas would continue to go up, and we put a floor, thank goodness, on our tax on the value of gas, but the price has not gone up, so there has been a lowering of the revenue. And in addition, the aspect of the bill that I quite frankly did not expect to have Congress act on the taxation of internet sales did not come through. So we have been operating for the last 2 years actually on a gas tax decrease. What the drivers have been paying has been less per gallon than they had paid before we acted in 2013. Now, starting the first of this month, the taxes are back at what they were before we acted. So the flow of money hasn't been as much of a gush as some people might have anticipated. Then the aspect is, with all of this backlog of needs, serious needs in every aspect of our transportation, how do you allocate that? So we have done some good work on making sure that these projects are well analyzed as to whether or not it's the best bang for the buck on congestion mitigation, safety needs, etc. But what has been left out of that I spotted in September, then asked again in November, and asked again in December, no money is coming to local roads. Now, it's one thing to talk about the big projects, but local roads essentially have received zero since 2005. Just pennies since then. And what I was hearing progressively worse in November and December was that there would be no money for local roads in the foreseeable future after 2025. More than 20 years of absolutely no funding for intersection improvements in my area, as in many areas. Congestion starts the minute you try to get out of your driveway, and certainly out of your neighborhood. So the bill that is now moving forward, the administration has worked very closely, Governor McAuliffe, and has worked extremely closely with the Chair of Appropriations, Chris Jones, is carrying an omnibus bill about the allocation of formulas, and I am extremely grateful that the Secretary and the Governor listened to my repeated questions about this and my counsel with them, and it includes 30% of the funding will now go to local roads, but it will be on the same competitive basis that we are allocating other funds, not directly to the localities, but making sure that we are doing the most meaningful projects that will benefit the region in making these improvements. But again, in areas such as mine, where I have a secondary road that by definition does not go outside the Fairfax County borders, but for decades it has carried more traffic than the average interstate. So obviously, this whole balance of how we really prioritize needs to most effectively use our money will be part of this whole picture, but I am extremely pleased with the breakthrough that we will get some money for local roads, as well as making up some of the deficit for transit that occurred when Congress did not act on the funding stream that we were going to put into transit on the internet sales.
Right. Now, the new hot lanes are in operation. I think they started last month. What are you hearing about their use, operation, and reaction from people in your district about them?
Well, there's been chit-chat in VDOT that the next express lane project, we've just got to figure out where Watts has been redistricted to, because we are sure it's going to happen in her district. I had 30% of the right-of-way for the express lanes on the Beltway, and lost a good portion of that in redistricting after it was constructed, and then now have over 60–70% of the right-of-way of 95–395 as it goes through Fairfax. So there are two issues, actually there are three issues that I would raise with the express lanes. The ones on the Beltway are moving quite well. They do not have the traffic that was originally projected in the revenue of the private investors. But the private investors are international. They have enough equity that they can carry it. And part of the reason that it hasn't had the traffic is that the conditions on the Beltway are so significantly improved by the construction being over, and also by the additional capacity that was put on the outer lanes in the public partnership with the private construction, that it will be a matter of time. But certainly it does give the options for individuals who have a meeting that they've got to make, and it goes both ways. Whereas the express lanes on 95–395 only go one way, and so directionally sometimes you have a problem where you would like to be able to use them, but they're only going one way. We also have I also represent an area where it was truncated just inside the Beltway rather than carrying commuters, particularly to the new military facility, and all of that coming off. And my other ongoing concern is that both of these projects, their key value in a transportation network is that they allow express buses and carpools to go free. Now, we can't serve the areas that are served by these facilities with fixed transit because it's not flexible enough. But this allows a very significant transit link to reduce the number of vehicles on the road by use of these facilities free. But on 95 in particular, it will depend upon having enough park and ride lots so that you can have the collection points from all the communities that it serves, rather than just encouraging growth at its terminus.
Good point. Good point. Delegate Krupicka, I want to turn our attention back to education, especially the standards of learning. There have been changes as of last session. I take it it's up for discussion again. People think further reforms are necessary. Can you talk to us about that, please?
Sure. Last year we passed pretty comprehensive SOL reform, reduced a number of tests in the elementary school and middle school, but we largely untouched, left high school untouched. So there's a number of proposals this year by Republicans and Democrats. I have some in, the governor has some, to start looking at high school testing and seeing how we can scale back the need for those high stakes tests in high school and really transition to what we call an alternative assessment, which is kind of a local project-based form of assessment to determine if a student has kind of learned all that they need in a particular subject. The exciting thing about the alternative assessments, which are currently being done in elementary school and middle school around the Commonwealth, is the local school districts are really embracing them. The teachers have, I hear from teachers all the time about how excited they are to have these tools available to them. And it's leading to students getting much more interesting projects. I mean, instead of the end of a course test, they have a multi-week, multi-month project that might be writing and presentation and may have some art, and they can integrate disciplines together, and they can really show kind of a depth of knowledge and analysis around a topic, whether it be a science experiment or a social studies project or something like that. We're trying to take that same kind of opportunity and bring it to high school, and I think we're going to do that. I think you're also going to see some work in high school about moving away from kind of a hard commitment to credit hours. I mean, we've had this kind of credit hours, seat time way of thinking about high school, that you have to take a certain number of credits to get to an endpoint. Right. I think we want to start transitioning to where we're actually thinking about have students learn the skills they need as opposed to how many hours did they spend sitting in a classroom. And that really will transform the way we organize a school, the ability of students to kind of move through kind of their academic career in a more flexible way where they can take more subjects, and because maybe they don't have to spend as much time on one subject because they've already mastered it, so they can spend more time on another. So those are kind of some of the big things that I think you're going to see come out of the General Assembly this year. Last year when we put in place the SOL reform, we created a SOL Innovation Committee that the Governor and the Secretary of Education have appointed people to. I serve on that. A number of other delegates and local school board officials and whatnot from around the Commonwealth serve on that. And it's become a real incubator for new ideas. I think it's a very exciting time for education in Virginia because there's a lot of bipartisan work going on around how do we reform our schools so that they function better for teachers and for our students.
Is there any further discussion around the ability of the state to take over a failing school? I believe a court declared that legislation unconstitutional. That's number one. Number two, there was another provision that purported to grade schools on an A to F basis. That caused a lot of controversy. Where do those two issues stand?
So the takeover of schools is essentially dead. The Supreme Court said, because of our Constitution, the way it's written, that there just isn't a mechanism for the state to take over, reach into a school district, and essentially take a school away from a school board. A number of us felt it was unconstitutional when the bill was first proposed. It took other people a little while to get there, but we're there now. Everyone agrees. So that bill is dead, but there are a number of initiatives, some that the governor's leading and others that folks have proposed in the legislature. But how do we support these school districts around the state that are struggling? A lot of that struggle is because they don't have as many resources. A lot of that struggle is because their teachers may need special training. So the governor has a proposal about principal training. I actually am looking at a proposal about teacher training to try to help bolster the capacity and skills of the personnel in those struggling schools so they can provide better service to their kids. So the topic is still there. We're just moving away from the takeover idea. On the grading of schools, we essentially killed the A to F grading last year for all intensive purposes after a lot of debate and a lot of consternation. There are a number of bills this year to really fully eliminate it or to move to what some call kind of a report card kind of model. We essentially have a report card now. For every school in Virginia, you can kind of see a report card of how they're doing on different subjects of, and I think the desire now is to take that report card that we currently use and see if we can make it a little bit more informative for parents, a little bit more useful, and I'm hopeful we'll come out of that with something a lot more positive than A to F. The big problem with A to F was ultimately if you rank schools by test scores, what you ultimately do is rank schools by family income. Right. So you've just created a long list of schools based on who has money and who doesn't. That's not a very effective way to know if a school is doing a good job. Great.
So many issues in only 45 days, and I know one of the other issues you're very concerned about is mental health.
Absolutely. Yeah. I serve, I'm concerned about mental health on so many different aspects, from the educational program, our veterans, and certainly what we are tragically dealing with as far as our college campuses and the effect of sexual assault on the victims. And I serve on criminal law subcommittee, and we have had extensive hearings about this, about the processes that we go through on our college campuses. But as I sat and listened to the hours of walking through what happens, with all the involvement I've had in mental health, I was painfully aware that we have to make sure that we maintain a balance between the person who has been victimized not being further victimized by losing control over what they need in moving forward. There will be victims who are absolutely ready the moment they report it. They want it to be fully investigated. They want it to go to the police. There will be other victims who are traumatized for a number of different reasons, who want to be able to go to a mental health counseling center that is provided on the college campus without and have the same privacy that anybody would have if you turn to a mental health professional.
Right.
To be able to work through the problems until you're ready to take the next step. All the while, speaking of victimization, this is going on while the individual is trying to complete an educational course that will determine her future and not be dragged further back by the victimization that she went through. So that just opens up what we have been dealing with, both with, again, the military, those who have had post-traumatic stress disorder, and what triggers and how they stay in control of dealing with the current reality rather than what was triggered in the trauma that occurred to them. The brain injury, I'm carrying legislation that people, I think, now understand more about what happens when the brain is injured and how that affects thought processes. The physical makeup of the brain, the chemical makeup of the brain, the trauma that changes how the brain functions, they're all totally interrelated. And as we work through our mental health issues, and I am on the 4-year study that Senator Deeds initiated, this is also spins off into that. And how do we make sure that an individual, for example, Cho, the gunman at Tech, went through the Fairfax County High School system with proper support. But that support and the knowledge of his need for the support didn't travel with him. So that's still another issue that we must deal with as far as the privacy and the rights of the people who need mental health services.
Great. We're going to end it with that. Thank you both for being here, Delegate Rob Krupicka and Delegate Vivian Watts. We're happy to have you here. The citizens of Northern Virginia should be very proud that you're representing them.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications, connecting Virginians to their government. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.